Okay, so you're moving through your career, right? And you really want to make the most of what you're good at.
Yeah.
And honestly, your time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what led us to this idea of like managing oneself,
Right.
which I think we kind of take for granted, but is really like the most fundamental skill for absolutely anyone.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to think that this is only for,
Right.
the exceptional people.
The Napoleons.
Yeah, the Da Vincis.
Yeah.
But what we're going to learn today is that it's not just for them.
Yeah.
It's something that even for, people like us
Yeah.
who might not be, the most exceptional figures in history,
Right.
understanding how to manage yourself is absolutely essential to,
Right.
developing yourself and even finding where you belong
Hands up.
and staying engaged for what could be a very long working life.
Totally.
So we're taking a deep dive today into kind of this framework for
Yeah.
self-management.
Yeah.
And it's based on these really, I think, timeless principles.
Yeah, I think so too.
And to guide us through these, we are turning to the work of Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
Now, Peter Drucker,
Oh, yeah, the writer,
teach
the
me,
consultant. He just seemed to have his finger on the pulse of like
oh, yeah,
all the major trends in the world of work for decades.
absolutely.
So what I think our mission should be today is to try to come away with some really like actionable insights
Yeah.
into how we can understand
Okay.
our strengths, how we perform, what our values
I
are,
love it.
and ultimately how all of this informs where we belong
Yeah,
and the kind of unique contribution that we can make.
absolutely. And I think Drucker would approve of that mission.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
So the first big question that Drucker kind of throws at us is, what are my strengths?
Yeah,
Now, we all have some idea
Sure.
of what we think we're good at,
of course. Yeah.
but Drucker really challenges us here.
He does. And says that most people are actually completely mistaken about what their strengths are
Interesting.
and even what they're not good at.
That's a really critical point to sort of absorb
Right.
right at the beginning,
Yeah.
because we often, we operate based on these assumptions
Right.
about, what we think we should be good at.
Yeah, or what our training was,
Exactly what our education or, our training suggests.
Right.
Or even just, what we enjoy doing.
Yeah.
But real effectiveness,
Yeah.
it doesn't come from these assumptions.
Right.
It comes from identifying and actually leveraging those strengths that we can really demonstrate.
Right. So how do we cut through all this noise and actually pinpoint what our strengths are?
Well, Drucker has this really interesting technique that he calls feedback analysis.
Okay, yeah. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so what's fascinating about it is it's so practical. So every time you make like a key decision or you take like a key action, you write down what you expect to happen as a result of that decision or action.
Got it.
And then like 9 to 12 months later,
Yeah.
you compare that to what actually happened.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he's been doing this for decades.
Yeah.
And still finds that it uncovers some surprises.
Wow.
He realized that, he had this really strong,
Yeah.
intuitive understanding of people in like technical roles,
Interesting.
but he didn't really connect as well
Okay.
with people who were more like generalist thinkers.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And so this feedback analysis, I think the core insight is not just like tracking results, but it's uncovering these hidden patterns of your effectiveness.
Right.
So you can see what you might not even recognize as your strengths
Yeah.
and when you consistently don't get those results.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So it's turning your past actions into valuable data.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's the really interesting part. This is not some trendy new management fad.
Right.
Drucker says this actually goes all the way back to the 14th century.
Well-
Apparently, some German theologian developed this. And then people like John Calvin and Ignatius of Loyola,
Wow.
they also used it
No kidding.
independently.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that these really influential individuals across, different fields and centuries
Yeah.
independently recognized the power of this method,
Yeah.
I think really speaks to its fundamental value
Yeah.
in driving performance and self-awareness.
And lasting impact, right?
Yeah, lasting impact, their focus on outcomes.
Yeah.
Informed by this constant practice of reflection, probably played a huge role in their impact.
Yeah. Okay, so we're doing this feedback analysis, right? We
Yeah.
have this data now.
Yeah.
What are the actionable takeaways?
Okay, so first and foremost,
Yeah.
you want to concentrate on your strengths.
Okay.
Now, this may seem kind of obvious,
Yeah.
but it means actively seeking out the roles and the responsibilities where your talents can really shine.
Yeah.
Don't fall into the trap of, trying to fix every weakness.
Right.
Especially the ones that, constantly lead to bad outcomes.
Right. It's not just about knowing where you excel.
Right.
It's also about working to make those strengths even stronger.
Yeah.
And Drucker says that feedback analysis can highlight areas where acquiring new skills or knowledge could really amplify your existing talents.
Yeah. So think strategically
Yeah.
about your development, Identify those skill gaps that are preventing you from fully utilizing those natural abilities.
Right.
And then proactively address those.
I like that, yeah.
Through learning mentorship or targeted practice.
Yeah.
Whatever works.
I love it.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things Drucker talks about is this danger of intellectual arrogance.
Oh, yeah.
He says that expertise in one area can sometimes lead people to dismiss the importance of knowledge in other fields.
Of course,
or to overestimate the power of intellect as a substitute for actual learning.
This is really about intellectual humility.
Right.
And that commitment to lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And he gives those examples of engineers who, might underestimate the complexities of human behavior or organizational dynamics.
Right.
And then HR professionals who maybe avoid, developing even a basic understanding of financial principles.
Oh, yeah.
And this kind of narrow focus can really limit your effectiveness.
Yeah, it's almost like having a top-of-the-line sports car, but only driving it around your neighborhood.
Totally. You're not using it to its full potential.
Right. And then there's also this thing about bad habits.
Oh, yeah.
There are recurring behaviors that undermine our effectiveness. So your feedback analysis is probably going to reveal some of those patterns too.
It will?
So, Drucker gives the example of a brilliant strategic thinker.
Okay.
Who consistently fails because they just lack the discipline to follow through.
Okay.
So they have these well-conceived plans.
Right. Great ideas are essential.
Yeah.
But without effective execution, they rarely lead to anything.
Right.
You need to adapt your plans and ensure implementation.
Yeah, and then he touches on something I think is so important for collaboration.
What's that?
Manners.
Oh, yeah.
He calls them like the lubricating oil.
The lubricating oil.
Of an organization.
Of an organization.
So essential for smooth interactions.
Yeah, what's insightful here is that any group of people working together will inevitably have friction.
Yeah.
But these simple acts of courtesy and respect can reduce that friction so much.
Totally, and allow people to work together.
And bright individuals, especially, early in their careers.
Right.
Sometimes overlook these basic social graces.
Yeah.
And it can really hurt them.
Yeah, I see that all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally.
Okay.
And this is maybe a tough one to swallow. Feedback analysis can help you identify areas where you just don't have
it.
The talent or the aptitude.
This could be tough.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's incredibly empowering.
Okay.
Think about how much time and effort people waste trying to become adequate at something they're just not good at.
Right.
Compare that to the potential return on investment of taking that same energy and moving from competence to excellence in an area where you actually have strength.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to fix these inherent weaknesses beyond the basic level of functionality.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good understanding now of how to identify and really leverage our strengths. And we're going to use this thing called feedback analysis.
Yep.
Now, Drucker takes us to another really important question.
Okay.
How do I perform?
Yeah.
He argues that, knowing how you get things done is just as critical as knowing what you're good at.
Absolutely.
And, performance style is really rooted in your personality and how you're wired to process information and interact with the world.
Right.
So while you can develop new skills and adapt to some extent fundamentally changing, your core performance style is likely to be really frustrating and unproductive. He brings up this really interesting distinction between a reader and a listener.
Oh, yeah.
Most people tend to lean towards one or the other.
Yeah.
Very rarely being equally proficient in both.
That's right.
The example he uses is so interesting.
Yeah, what is it?
So Eisenhower and Lyndon Johnson as presidents.
Sure.
Eisenhower was a reader.
Okay.
He thrived when he could process information in written form, but when he was forced into these extemporaneous situations, he struggled to articulate his thoughts.
Right.
Lyndon Johnson was a listener.
Okay.
He was super effective as a senator, but when he became president, he missed a lot of information that was conveyed in these written memos.
Yeah, so the key takeaway here is understanding, your fundamental processing style.
Right.
Are you wired for the written word or for the spoken word?
This is so important when we're thinking about choosing roles.
Absolutely, our communication.
Right.
And, this preference extends beyond just how you receive information.
Right.
It also impacts how you learn most effectively.
Yeah.
So this leads us to understanding your learning style.
So he challenges this kind of traditional one-size-fits-all approach to education.
Totally.
So he gives these examples, like Winston Churchill apparently learned best by writing, even drafts that were never meant to be seen.
Wow.
Beethoven took meticulous notes,
Okay.
not to refer back to them, but as part of his process.
To learn.
Yeah.
Got it.
And then there are people who learn best by doing.
Of course, by doing.
And then there are people like Drucker who learn by hearing themselves talk.
Like me.
And that CEO you mentioned, right?
Oh, yeah, the CEO. He talked for 3 hours.
To his staff.
To his staff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just talking and learning.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is that while people have a sense of how they learn, they don't actually structure their learning habits.
No, they don't.
To align with that.
Think about your own professional development.
Yeah.
Are you seeking out learning opportunities that resonate with your learning style?
Yeah. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
You got it.
And Drucker doesn't stop there with the performance styles.
No, he doesn't.
He says we also have to think about, whether we like to work alone or with other people.
On a team or alone.
Whether we're good decision makers or whether we're better at advising.
Whether we thrive under pressure.
Or need a more structured environment.
Or whether we like to work.
Big organizations, small organizations.
If organizations are small.
Yeah.
Again, the idea isn't to change who we are.
Right.
But to just gain an understanding of our tendencies.
Yeah.
So we can really optimize our performance.
Right. And seek out those environments where you're most likely to succeed.
All right. So we've explored strengths. We've explored how we perform. Now Drucker takes us to this question of values.
Yeah. What are my values?
What are my values?
Yeah.
And he says right away that this goes way beyond ethics.
Yeah. He says ethics are universal.
Right.
He uses this interesting test called the mirror test.
Oh, the mirror test, yeah.
He says, ask yourself what kind of person you want to see.
When you look in the mirror?
When you look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Ethical principles are pretty consistent.
They are.
But values are more personal.
They are much more personal.
They define what you think is meaningful.
Yeah.
What's worthwhile.
Yeah, and where you can thrive.
And the kind of work that you want to be doing.
Totally.
He says working in an organization that has values that clash with your own is a recipe for disaster.
It is.
And he uses this really interesting example of an HR executive whose deep-seated value was promoting from within.
Okay.
But the company she went to work for valued bringing in outside hires.
Oh, wow.
For fresh blood.
Oh, so there's a conflict.
There's a huge conflict.
A conflict of values.
It's not that one is right or wrong. It's just that they valued things differently.
They did, and ultimately it led to her departure.
Yeah.
Even though she was competent.
Yeah, and he gives some other interesting examples, like pharmaceutical companies.
Okay.
Some prioritize incremental improvements.
Okay.
Others want these breakthroughs.
Yeah, risky breakthroughs.
Yeah.
But again, those are value conflicts.
Total value conflicts.
Not economic decisions.
Yeah, or even businesses that prioritize short-term profits versus long-term growth.
Values again. It always comes back to values.
Yeah. So the main takeaway here is that you have to align
values with the organization.
With the values of the organization.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might find a conflict.
A conflict.
Between your strengths and your values.
Tell me about it.
So you might be really good at something.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't align with what you think is meaningful.
Right. Or ethical.
Yeah. You're going to be unhappy.
Totally.
And Drucker tells this really compelling personal story.
What is it?
About how he left investment banking.
Wow.
In London in the 1930s.
Yeah, he was clearly talented in that field.
Yeah.
It probably played to his strengths.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he felt it wasn't contributing
to something that he valued.
Yeah, and he valued people.
Yeah.
And ideas.
And ideas that could make a difference.
And he walked away.
And
especially during, a time of economic uncertainty.
It's a powerful reminder.
It is.
That values should be our guiding compass.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a picture now of our strengths, how we perform, what our values are. So the next question Drucker asks.
What's that?
Where do I belong?
Oh, where do I belong? Yeah.
He acknowledges that some people find their calling early.
Yeah.
But most of us, especially those of us who are, gifted, need more time to figure this out.
Right.
But he says, by our mid-20s, we should have a handle on those first 3 questions.
Right. About our strengths. How our values.
And our values. And that should give us a pretty good idea. Of where we belong. But even more importantly, Drucker emphasizes knowing where we don't belong. So somebody who isn't inclined to make quick decisions should probably stay away from jobs that require them to be making these constant high-stakes decisions.
Right.
And he uses the example of General Patton.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant subordinate commander, but probably would have been a terrible
independent commander. Right.
So this is all about leveraging our self-awareness to make smarter choices. And to avoid these situations where we're likely to underperform or feel misaligned.
Yeah.
So knowing your limitations
is as valuable as knowing your strengths.
It is. And it allows us to proactively seek out environments where our talents can flourish.
Yeah.
Now, when we do find that opportunity that resonates with our self-knowledge, Drucker says we should not only accept it, but also be able to say, this is how I need to work.
Right.
This is how the work needs to be structured.
To maximize your effectiveness.
To maximize my effectiveness. And these are the kinds of results that you can expect from me.
So you're going from like a passive recipient of opportunities to like an active shaper.
Yeah, I love that.
Of your professional path.
Yeah.
And this is what allows people to move beyond just being competent to
outstanding
performance.
Okay, so we're really starting to gain some self-insight here.
Yeah, we are.
Now, Drucker moves to this question of contribution.
What should I contribute?
And, historically, in a lot of work structures, people were told what to contribute.
They were just told.
But today, especially for those of us in knowledge-based roles,
knowledge workers,
we need to ask this question ourselves.
That's right.
And, this idea of, find your passion and the money will follow.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work.
So you need to be strategic and considered.
Yeah. Drucker says there are 3 elements to this.
3 elements. Okay.
The first, what does the situation require? So what are the needs of your organization, your team?
Yeah.
The project.
Yeah, you need to be aware
we're working on
of the challenges and the opportunities around you.
So the second element, given my strengths, my performance style, my values, how can I make the biggest contribution to what needs to be done? And the third element, what results have to be achieved to make a difference? So it's not just about being busy.
No, it's about outcome.
It's about outcomes
that have impact.
Drucker gives the example of this hospital administrator who focused on the ER.
On the emergency room.
And he wanted to improve efficiency and quality of care within 2 years.
2 years. That's a good timeline.
Yeah. So every patient would be seen by a qualified nurse within 60 seconds of arrival.
That's great.
And Drucker actually advises focusing on these contribution goals that can be achieved in about 18 months. So they should be challenging, but also realistic and visible and measurable.
Yeah, so you can track your progress and see the value.
That leads to an action plan, right?
It does.
And that 18-month window is long enough.
It's long enough.
For meaningful progress.
But short enough.
To maintain focus.
That's right.
Okay, so Drucker says that managing oneself isn't only about, individual performance. It's also about taking responsibility.
Well, responsibility
for relationships.
Yeah. Because most of us don't work in isolation.
No, we don't.
So he breaks this down into two parts.
Two parts.
The first is recognizing that everybody we work with is an individual, just like us, with their own strengths. Their own performance styles and their own values. And to be effective. We have to make an effort to understand
them.
These things about them.
Yeah, and he gives that example.
Of somebody who, had been trained to write reports for a reader boss, and then went to work for a listener boss, kept doing the same thing.
It seems so obvious.
It does.
We don't always do that.
No, we don't. We don't adapt our style.
Take the time to adapt.
Yeah.
And this applies to everybody we work with.
Everybody,
our team members.
Our supervisors, our subordinates.
You're the boss.
And Drucker says this is the key to managing your boss.
Managing your boss.
The second part of taking responsibility for relationships is owning our communication.
Owning your communication.
And he says a lot of these conflicts come from just not understanding what other people are doing, how they work.
Yeah, what their priorities are.
What
outcomes they're working toward.
Exactly.
Why the root of this is not asking.
Just not asking.
He explains that, the past, this wasn't as necessary.
No, because
the work was...
It was more homogenous. But today, with all these specialized jobs.
Specialized knowledge workers.
We have to communicate.
We do.
And if someone doesn't understand what you're doing. As a knowledge specialist.
Right.
It's your job.
It's your job. Host, speaker,